Welcome to Myanmar Musings, the research podcast of the Myanmar Research Centre based at the Australian National University, Canberra, where we strive for illuminating illustrative discussions with leading scholars and thinkers who have important things to say about Myanmar. I'm your host, Luke Corbin. It's October 27, 2016, and today we are speaking to Chit Win, PhD candidate in the Department of Political and Social Change in the Coral Bell School of Asia-Pacific Affairs, the Australian National University. Chit Win is a Myanmar national who has overseen Myanmar-Thailand border affairs in his work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Naypyidaw. He was also posted to Jakarta and Tel Aviv in various capacities before undertaking his doctoral research here in Australia. He is co-convener of the upcoming 2017 Myanmar Update Conference here at the ANU, and his research interests include ethnic politics, ideas of democratisation, and co-optation. Hello, Chit Win.
Hi, hello.
First, let me say congratulations. As I understand, you are imminently about to have your oral presentation and submit your PhD.
Oh, thank you very much. I have about 3.5 months before I submit my PhD.
I think we should talk about your thesis.
Please.
Your doctoral research, it questions the role of Myanmar's legislature, the Hluttaw, through the frame of the democratic transition. How did you yourself transition from civil servant to scholar, and what led you to researching the Hluttaw in Myanmar in particular?
All right. So first of all, I used to wear a diplomatic hat in my previous capacity at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I got an Australian award to do my doctorate here at the ANU. I've been defending my country for more than 10 years, and all of a sudden I come to ANU and try to write about what's really going on in Myanmar in a very blunt, direct, open way. And in the beginning, I was a bit more defensive, more policy-oriented, but my supervisors helped me to go through these things. The real also challenge came when I did my fieldwork at the Naypyidaw in the parliament, because I know so many people inside the Myanmar's legislature, the Hluttaw. So people treat me as if I were still from the foreign ministry. They know that I have taken a break from the foreign ministry to do my doctoral research, but they still treated me as a mid-career official. So I have to be very careful when I deal with when I engage with them.
Yeah, I imagine that there would be some advantages, like you've just kind of alluded to, in terms of access with your background, but at the same time, you would need to be quite clear who you're representing at that moment.
That's right. So some of the information that I received are sensitive. They just give it to me because they trusted me. But I have to make sure that I have to tell them that I'm receiving these information not as a civil servant, but as a researcher.
All right. So, as I understand it, your thesis, the general argument, is that although transitional legislatures are essential institutions for entrenching democracy, they face two primary constraints. I think these are legislative autonomy and institutional capacity. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
Right. So first of all, I think we need to understand what is the legislature. It is a political institution that gives a legitimacy to the government. Through the legislature, they elect the president in a lot of the political system. In the direct presidential election, legislature serve as a counterbalance to the executive. Now, when it comes to democratic transition, those countries experiencing transitions from authoritarian regimes, legislature, they themselves play a more important role, bringing democracy, the idea of democracy, to the people. Moreover, they have to also show their role model by constraining the power of the executive, because the executive have been too powerful under the authoritarian regime. So the legislature had a big duty to perform. But what happened is that during these transitions, legislatures were overlooked. Why? It's because during the transition, it's the primary actors may not come from the legislature. It can be a military general, or it is a popular uprising, a revolutionary leader, for instance. Or in some cases, it will be the outside forces intervene into the country. In those instances, the constitution is brought from the outside. The constitution is drafted under the previous regime influences. In some cases, it will be a pacted transition where the constitution is drafted in consultation with the opposition forces and the current regime. In those cases, the legislatures are mostly, their roles are undermined. But I'm trying to say that they have still play an important role in the transition. But when I conceptualize it, I find that they face two challenges. First is the autonomy, and the other one is the capacity. The capacity, what I mean is their actual role. In the transition, legislatures are influenced by the executive or other outside forces. Therefore, they don't have an autonomy in most of the democratic transition. Therefore, whatever they do, they can do brilliant things, but under the influence of either the executive, the pacted transition. So whatever they do, it's not their authority. They've been asked to do, unless they have a legislative autonomy. And the second stage, if they have a legislative authority somehow, what role can they play in the transition? Now, I find that the transitional legislature, scholars have written a lot of materials in it. There have been about 53 legislatures in the third wave of democracy that has been, that experienced democratic transition. So when I look at them, what I find is that scholars wrote about, descriptively about each type of legislature, their experiences, and as I said, they can be also different from the type of transition, level of transition they are in, the history, the region. So they can be so diverse. So I find it a bit difficult, problematic to conceptualize. But reading from it, I draw on these two conclusions. So I find that transitional legislatures experience maybe three dynamics in their role. First is the overall, the political reform, whether they can change the constitution, they can draft the constitution, they bring about changes to the country. So it's more about structural changes. For instance, in Myanmar case, can they remove the military from the legislature? Can they bring about federalism into Myanmar? Next, I also look at the norms. So when you transition from one system to another, especially in the democratic transition, you need to realize the norms in the democracy, democratic values, accountability, responsibilities. In Myanmar case, for instance, we've been so much used to under authoritarian regime where we don't have any accountability. So how do we bring about those horizontal or vertical accountability to the system? So I look at whether the legislature have a role in enacting these kind of laws to bring about changes in the country, not as a whole political dynamic, but the values inside the country to the people. So this is one sense of dimension that I look at. Another one is the conflicts. It differs from country to country at what stage they are in. For example, in Indonesia, they face corruption, secession movements, Aceh problems, natural disasters, tsunamis, communal conflict, etc. How did the parliament or the Indonesian parliament intervene? So as for Myanmar, we face a number of transitional conflicts that had a profound impact on this transition. So what are they? They are like peace process, for example, the signing of the national ceasefire agreement and the ethnic conflict. How did the parliament intervene or play a role in this process? For example, the communal violence in the Rakhine state. Scholars said it was a turning point in the Myanmar's transition. How did the Hluttaw perform in this conflict? And finally, I also look at the land rights. So in Myanmar, we are facing a lot of land grabbing issues. So how did the legislature play it? So based on these conflicts, the performance of the legislature, I try to draw a conclusion how the Myanmar legislature performed its role in the region. So in a way, I'm contributing to a broader theoretical framework. My framework maybe will serve as a kind of a guide when we make an analysis to other transitional legislatures to look at from these dynamics.
It sounds like quite a comprehensive framework. I was particularly struck just at the beginning thinking about the concept of autonomy. So how would you assess the autonomy of the Hluttaw at the moment?
So the autonomy means the bottom line is that whether the legislature can do things that it should do, basically to represent the people, enact laws, to make laws, and to oversight the government. So when I look at it, for example, lawmaking, whether the legislature is free from executive enacting laws. Now, when you look at the transitional legislature, you will find that 90% of the laws are proposed by the executive. So there's a rule called 90% rule. So I look at Myanmar. How's it going in Myanmar? So I find that in Myanmar, they propose like 75% by the executive, 25% by the lawmakers. It passed the 90% rule. Myanmar legislature is acting a bit more freely from the executive in terms of law making. So the second one is about the representation to the people. So when they go down to the constituency, how they deal with the public officials. Do they have problems? Were these lawmakers undermined by the local authorities? And in terms of oversight, as you know, for the case of Myanmar, the party from the executive and the legislatures are the same. The Union Solidarity and Development Party, backed by the military. So if the ruling party is from the executive and the legislatures are the same, how can it be different from each other? Will the legislature have its own autonomy? So I look at the motions and the questions that are raised by the lawmakers. So I find that lawmakers from the USDP were scrutinizing their own executive, their colleagues from the USDP. That's how I analyze whether the legislature has autonomy or not.
And I guess we're talking about a democratic transition here and a kind of a new institution with the new buildings and everything in Naypyidaw. But in fact, of course, the Phutdaw has a history in Myanmar. You have the socialist one and from the parliamentary period after independence as well. And these must have left some historical legacies. Is that the case? Or which one is more influential?
For those who have been to Naypyidaw or who have seen some of the video clips, we will find the parliament is more like a palace. So when you look at the Myanmar's legislature in its physical form, it's so gigantic, so grandeur, and we wonder whether how can it be possible to reflect the country's level of economy, people's poverty, suffering, and with this grandeur of the legislative building. So it's not designed for a legislature. The lawmakers doesn't have their own offices. The committee rooms are very small and they are physically apart from the main buildings. You have to travel from one place to another. What I'm trying to say is that the structure itself is designed to be a rubber stamp, a legislature, not a functioning legislature, but just a window dressing. But my dissertation looks at how it transformed into a robust or even a hostile legislature confronting the executive. That's where the institutional legacies came in. So if I can explain a bit more time. So the word Phutdaw itself derived from the pre-colonial time. So the word Phutdaw means you relinquish all the powers. So Phutdaw, Daw is the royal word for the royalty. So Phutdaw is where the people relinquish their authority to this Phutdaw, the office, so that the Phutdaw can exercise the power on behalf of the monarch, the king. So it more like an executive office or the secretariat of the king. As time goes by, during the period of colonization, the British established a kind of legislative institution. But it's more about co-optation than the real functioning of the legislature. What I mean by co-optation is that through these legislative institutions, the British co-opted the local elites, the ethnic elites, locked them up, gave them very high salaries to make sure they don't rebel. They didn't rebel. And what happened is that because they didn't have any job to do inside the legislature, they ended up fighting each other. And that's how the Parliament of Burma, after independence, inherit from the legacy of the British colonial legislature, party infight. So the party infight during the colonial period was so severe, so strong. It inherited the parliament after the independence inherit these styles. People are used to it, and they fight each other inside the parliament, forgetting that they have a task to do, the nation building. They have a task to do to unite the whole country. Ethnic elites were also co-opted into the parliament to represent their own parties, to their parties, mainstream parties. And these mainstream parties try to bring all these ethnic people unity under one Myanmar identity. And that's where problems started, ethnic conflicts. And the military government had a coup in 1962, fed up with all these things, and they established a new legislature, the Socialist Phutdaw, where there will be no party infight at all. They will just be all shut up and just do whatever the executive says. So drawing on the lessons from the Parliament of Burma, the Socialist Legislature practiced that one. But the Socialist Legislature had some democratic seats. It has a seats of inclusiveness. It has a seats of technocratic, co-opting the technocrats. For example, in the Socialist Legislature, every legislative committee had 15 committee members, one from each region in the states, plus the chair of the committee, 15. And not only that, the Socialist Legislature, the Hluttaw, co-opted the military, the technocrats into its own socialist party, so that it became a strength. So turning clock to fast forward, today's legislature, when they tried to draft the constitution in 2008, the international they imposed sanctions on Myanmar. They're not helping at all. So the constitutional drafters, nearest they can look, was the closest one is the Socialist Legislature, the practice. So apparently they have copied a lot of the practices from the Socialist Legislature, as well as the Parliament after the independence of Burma at that time. So all these are ingrained, and because they always afraid that the party infight one day would result the military taking a coup again, and the lawmakers every day they're seeing the 25% military sitting inside the legislature. They always fear that if they made a party infight, a conflict, then the military would take over again. Therefore, lawmakers became to talk non-confrontational, control themselves, but basically working for the country. And that's where the non-partisanship came in. And that's how Myanmar's legislature achieved its autonomy in this way, free from the executive.
How about the role of the speakers? How have they contributed to this?
Right. In other countries, the role of the speakers are more like a housekeeper. They try to make the house in order. But
it's a thankless job.
Yeah, they cannot vote, and sometimes party doesn't want to send their members to become the speaker because they lost a vote. But in Myanmar, when you look at the speaker's authority, it's much more powerful than a normal parliamentary or legislative speakers. So they have a set of rules that give him a special power over the agenda, over the lawmakers, over the control of the staff members and the legislative session. Not only that, the type of voting. It's because to make sure that the constitutional drafters under the military regime made sure that the Hluttaw become not robust or aggressive to the executive.
Right.
So the speaker will control the pace of the legislature. The speaker can call for legislative session anytime it wants, and he can decide the type of voting system. Now in Myanmar, it's a society where we don't really confront each other in this type of open where the TV is live show.
It's not like Trump versus Clinton.
That's right. So when you're having over 600 lawmakers, the speaker will say, those who dare to say no, please stand up. Would you stand up? You will be alone among the 600 people to standing up. It's very intimidating, so you'd rather not stand up. So the speaker can play a lot of tricks. Now, if he wants to pass this motion very easily, he would just say, please say yes or no if you agree on this issue. And they will say, yeah, 3 times, and then passed. So the speaker gives indications. If he says, let's do the voice voting, it means that he wanted to pass this motion very quickly, depending on the issue. So what I'm trying to say is that he's very powerful in this regard. And these 2 speakers, and I think Myanmar was lucky to have these 2 speakers. The previous 2 speakers, Tura Shweman as the Pidu Hluttaw, the lower house, and Kin Aung Mien as the upper house, the Amyuta Hluttaw. Why? Because one is politically ambitious. He wanted to become the president, so he is driving the legislature to become robust, taking the credit for the transition. On the other hand, the second speaker, King Aung Mien, he became the speaker by accident. He was very impartial. He has no political ambition. Therefore, he decided to institutionalize, to strengthen the legislative institution.
So they have quite a lot of power, but because Myanmar got two good eggs, it's been a positive story.
It's positive sometimes, and it's also negative because of the political ambition of the speaker, Shui Man. And I think because of that, there's a conflict between executive and legislature. And what I analyze is that they try to get the credit for the transition. And institutionally, the executive became hostile to the legislature became hostile to the executive, even though they're from the same party.
You also claim a number of technocratic, ethnic and minor party lawmakers were co-opted to the new political system. How did this occur? And I remember you memorably talked about co-optation in the Australian context between Clive Palmer and Tony Abbott. Very funny.
Oh yeah, that's how I won the 3-minute thesis competition at the ANU. In my thesis, I claimed three things that shaped the Hluttaw. One is the role of the speaker, the other one is the institutional legacies, and the other one is the role of the co-opted lawmakers. So what do I mean by co-opted lawmakers is that, after the election in 2010, the legislature needs a legitimacy. They just can't do it themselves. So they need to co-opt outsiders to make sure the Hluttaw is inclusive, presented as an inclusive institution. So what they did was that they accepted political parties to run. Those ethnic parties, minor parties, are not hostile to the military. Not only that, the pro-military party, the USDP, also co-opted the technocrats, ethnic elites, into its own party. So there are two sets of co-option, one into its own party, one into the parliament, to make sure they give legitimacy. So they are supposed to be a statues, they will just say nothing. They will be there as a symbolic reason, as in the case of socialist legislature. The leaders will decide, they will just endorse. But it turns out that co-option, there's a breakdown in the co-optation. So what happened is that because the speakers practice non-partisanship due to the institutional legacies, they allow, and because these ethnic lawmakers, the technocratic lawmakers, they know how to deal with the military in the past. They know it is not a good idea to confront. They could show restraint, control inside the parliament. They cooperate with the leadership, and therefore the leadership became comfortable with them. And at the same time, the leaders want to make the legislature robust. So these co-opted lawmakers were given enough freedom to talk freely, and that's where the whole thing's coming into effect. A chain reaction occurs. So in the beginning, the USDP lawmakers, those who were co-opted, they were not allowed to talk. But these ethnic lawmakers who were co-opted into the parliament, they started to talk because they were given opportunities. The speakers want to show the legislature as an inclusive institution. They try to talk, engage, but they didn't touch sensitive matters. So they gain confidence. And at the same time, because of the institutional legacies, these co-opted lawmakers were given positions in the important committee systems. So once inside the committees, they play their own role sensibly. And that motivated the USDP lawmakers, technocratic lawmakers inside the legislature. They want to engage with them. And therefore, the speakers allow them. And then these technocratic lawmakers brought their professional background with them and then oversight the government very effectively. And that's how the whole process started. These co-opted lawmakers were the primary factor that gave everything alive. Because co-opted lawmakers were sensible, the speakers were confident to use them. And because the speakers gave them some power, this motivated the USDP lawmakers to get involved. And when they get involved, they can effectively oversight the government. And the speakers afterwards used these USDP technocratic lawmakers to become more oversight the executive aggressively. So it's a kind of a chain reaction. So I want to say that in Myanmar, when we talk about Myanmar politics, we always try to say the military, Aung San Suu Kyi, the NLD, but we sometimes forget those little lawmakers, the co-opted lawmakers, who in the very first place try to be sensible, non-confrontational. They try to be cooperative, more accommodative. But once they get the power, they flex their muscles for the betterment of the country, bringing other forces with them to oversight the government and show a role model to people of Myanmar how a legislature can play a role in the transition. And that's why I say that these lawmakers should not be forgotten.
I wonder how they are being perceived by certain other people who still have power.
So what happened is that unfortunately, they became unsung heroes of the transition. These co-opted lawmakers. In the 2015 election, the NLD wiped out all the electorates, all the constituencies. There are new ethnic parties established, and they blame to those inside the parliament, the ethnic lawmakers inside the parliament, for collaborating with the USDP. They were portrayed as traitors. They were not given credit. Neither the USDP trusted them fully, nor the ethnic elites in their own constituency trusted them. So they became unsung heroes.
Almost martyrs.
Martyrs, you would say.
Great. Wow. Okay, I think we're just about running out of time, but I had as another PhD student at the ANU, thinking about research and talking to many other graduate students, I thought I should ask you about sources, because your thesis relies in part on ethnography and interviews, but also in part on content analysis from the records of the legislative plenary sessions from 2011 to 2016. These are a new line of sources in Myanmar. How easy was it to work with them, and do you have advice for other researchers interested in doing this kind of research?
They're publicly available. I'm fortunate enough to get them in soft copies where I can easily do the keyword search. Otherwise, you will have a 1,000-page volume. How many volumes? I have like 23 or 24 volumes of books that you have to go page by page. Otherwise, but you can. The legislature is now increasingly becoming researcher friendly, so it's worth to approach and ask them. In this way, it is important that anyone who is researching Myanmar should learn the language. Otherwise, it will be quite difficult for them. Another way of doing is like I stayed in the legislature with the with the lawmakers for 4 months in the dorm together, and I gained a lot of rich information from them. And I think doing the ethnographic work is not a bad idea at all. And I think it's even reduce your time when you make a content analysis, because they will identify which to look at, what to look at. And these days there are a lot of support coming from development partners, from international development partners. So I think you can also collaborate with them. I think Myanmar becomes a kind of a sexy topic these days. I think because one is an unexplored area for a long time. It's been off limit to the researchers, and they face a lot of challenges. And also I find some of the a bit problematic because because they don't fully understand the context. So I'm afraid that sometimes their research can be misleading because they really don't know the context in detail. So for example, everything happened in Myanmar for a reason. The military government didn't came all of a sudden. There were reasons why military government was there. There were reasons for ethnic conflict. And there's always the two sides of the coin, There were times where the Myanmar government had really take a very difficult decision to sacrifice all these things for the benefit of the country or things. So I really encourage the researchers, not just look at just the stories of sufferings and everything that we like, but you really look at why really it happened. Sometimes they themselves are responsible.
And a new theme that I'm doing in these podcasts, just before we finish, is asking my guests, do you have any recommendations of recent books or films or anything to do with Myanmar that has piqued your interest? If you want to make a recommendation on the podcast, we can end with that.
Oh, okay. I've never thought about that.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Take your time.
There's a book that I made a review. It's called, what is it? The Burma Spring. Yeah.
By the female journalist?
Yeah, the female journalist. And I think it brings a lot of fascinating stories about people, ordinary people, how they've been obsessed to astrology, how they've been obsessed to luck, why were they, the problems faced by the migrant workers, people along the Myanmar-Thai border, living at the refugee camps, their dream of going back, but at the same time, their children are so much accustomed to this life in the border area and the life in Bangkok. The kids, they don't want to go back to Myanmar, but the parents want to do this kind of and it's very fascinating to read. I recommend that one.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jiwin. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me as well.
And good luck. I look forward to reading your book when it's published.
Thank you. I hope to publish a book soon.
Great.
Right.